Well, we come to the end of our study of Samson's life today. When Benjamin Franklin was 7 years old, a visitor gave him some change. Sometime later, Franklin saw a boy playing with a whistle, and he offered to give the boy the change he had for the whistle. The boy accepted the offer, so Benjamin gave the boy all the money that he had and for the whistle. He played the whistle all over the house, enjoying it until he discovered that he'd actually given 4 times more than the whistle was worth. Instantly, the whistle lost its charm.
Of course.
As he grew older, Franklin generalized this principle. When he saw a man neglecting his family or a business for political popularity, or a miser giving up friendship for the sake of accumulating wealth, he would say he pays too much for his whistle.
I got it.
Well, the story of Benjamin Franklin has an excellent lesson for us today as well. All too often we pay too great a price for something that looks good to us and promises us so much but delivers so little. All too often we are attracted to something that looks good to us only to discover that what we thought would bring us joy, pleasure, and happiness only brings us pain and suffering. As Christians, we should not be fooled. The world in which we live in offers us many whistles that are not worth the price. Again, today we've come to the closing scene of Samson's life and the studies that we have gone through. We have learned in our study of the life of Samson that he was motivated by self-interest, self-gratification, and revenge. We have seen from our study of Samson that he has been constantly going down a road leading him toward physical and spiritual destruction. To sum up what we have learned about Samson, Adam Clarke says it this way in his commentary. Samson was a man of little mind, a slave to his passions, and the wretched dupe of his mistress. He was not great, though he was a strong man, and even his muscular force would have been lost or spent on beating the air had he not been frequently under the impulse of the divine spirit. He often got himself into broils and difficulties from which nothing but supernatural intercession could save him. Now that kind of sums up Samson's life that we've been studying. Again, Samson was a strong, weak man, if you will. Through his great physical strength, he could defeat the enemy around him, but in his spiritual weakness, he could never defeat himself. Or he was always defeating himself. Well, there were moments when Samson walked in the spirit, but for the most part, he walked in the flesh. When we think about Samson, we think about the life that could have been. He had all the potential going for him. He had God's Spirit with him. He was blessed from the beginning of his life. He had great opportunities before him, but we know that through our studies he squandered most all of them, didn't he? Appointed and anointed by God to deliver his people from the hands of the Philistines, Samson never seems to be interested in the task that God had set before him. God had called him for a purpose. But Samson didn't seem to care about that purpose at all, did he? He never had any thought about it whatsoever. Well, in our text today, we are given the story of a tragic end to a man who paid too much for his whistle. Samson lost his power, his position, his testimony, all because he valued sin in his life more than he valued God in his life. In our lesson today, we have a story of celebration, humiliation, restoration, and vindication. Today we pick up the story by reading in chapter 16, beginning verse 23. Now the rulers of the Philistines assembled to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon their god, and to celebrate, saying, Our God has delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hands. When the people saw him, they praised their God, saying, Our God has delivered our enemy into our hands, the one who laid waste our land and multiplied our slain. While they were in high spirits, they shouted, Bring out Samson to entertain us. So they called Samson out of the prison, and he performed for them. When they stood him among the pillars, Samson said to the servant who held his hand, Put me where I can feel the pillars that support the temple, so that I may lean against them. Now the temple was crowded with men and women. All the rulers of the Philistines were there, and on the roof were about 3,000 men and women watching Samson perform. Then Samson prayed to the Lord, O sovereign Lord, remember me. O God, please strengthen me just once more, and let me with one blow get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. Then Samson reached toward the 2 central pillars on which the temple stood, bracing himself against them. His right hand on the one and his left on the other. Samson said, Let me die with the Philistines. Then he pushed with all his might, and down came the temple on the rulers and all the people in it. Thus he killed many more when he died than while he lived. Then his brothers and his father's whole family went down to get him. They brought him back and buried him between Zorah and Estaol in the tomb of Manoah, his father. He had led Israel 20 years. From this passage, we discovered that there are 2 reasons why the rulers assembled themselves together. First of all, it was for a public celebration. Public celebration. We read in verse 23, Now the rulers of the Philistines assembled themselves to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon their god. Well, the first reason why they assembled was because they wanted to celebrate. They wanted to sacrifice to their god, if you will. And Dagon was the chief god or the chief deity of the Philistines, and the Philistines had a national day to honor their god. And Dagon, meaning the little fish, was one of those national gods of the Philistines, and this idol had a body of a fish and the hands and head of a man. This was their god. It's kind of weird, isn't it? When the Philistines conquered the coastal region of Canaan, they adopted the Dagon god as their chief god, and although this name is that of a fish, Dagon was primarily the agricultural god of the Philistines. Okay? Now that's kind of interesting in itself. Remember what Samson did to their agriculture, their crops? He destroyed their crops.
He burned them.
He burned them up. Yeah. So now they're here celebrating because their God, according to them, have captured the enemy. In this scene before us, we see the Philistines gathering to make a great sacrifice unto the Philistine deity. The primary objective of this day was to offer the sacrifice to celebrate the victory of their God over their enemy. From this text, we see that they also brought Samson, and Samson in his life dishonored God. Here again was a man called to honor God with his life, but we see that he dishonored God. We read that the second reason for the Philistines, or the rulers, to be coming together was to celebrate, saying, Our God has delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hands. Now, if you've been with us, you know that they had come up with a scheme in order to find out the strength of Samson. They are the ones that devised this scheme. They used Delilah to trick him into revealing his strength. But they attribute that capturing of Samson to their God, didn't they? It was these rulers that had persuaded Delilah to help them capture Samson. They had accomplished their objective, and now they called the people together to celebrate a victory celebration. And for the Philistines, it was time to celebrate. It was a time to party. It was a time to party. You going underwater here?
Yes, I'm going to. I'm lost because all I was looking at.
Although these rulers, along with Delilah, had a hand in capturing Samson, again they attributed his capture to their god Dagon. The capture of Samson was not only seen by these rulers as a personal victory, it was seen as a victory for their God. It said, our God delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hands. We read in verse 24, when the people saw him, they praised their God, saying, our God has delivered our enemy into our hands, the one who laid waste our land and multiplied our slain. Again, what did Samson do? He was a thorn in their side, right? He burned up their crops, he killed a lot of Philistines, and now he's the one that's captured. So they're here celebrating and having a big party because of their capture. They're finally rid of their nemesis, their thorn in the side, if you will. When Samson was brought out to be put on public display, the people broke out in spontaneous praise to their God. Now, again, the first thing we notice in this verse is that the people begin to praise their God, because according to them, their God had delivered the enemy into their hands. In this verse, we are given the mindset of the people of the Philistines. We are given the idea that what the Philistines think about Samson. I can imagine their whole focus is just focused on him. Period.
We want to get rid of this guy.
They want to get rid of this guy. He slew many of them. He burned up their crops. He affected their economy. Everything about him they hated. They wanted to get rid of him. Again, the focus of the Philistine is not on the nation of Israel whatsoever. Okay? But on Samson. It was all about Samson, wasn't it? He was the one that had caused them so much trouble. As we learned, he just wreaked havoc on the Philistines. As we learned earlier, again, he just was a pain in their side, if you will. When David committed sin with Bathsheba, it gave opportunity for shame to be brought on the name of God. And in the same sense, this is what happened to Samson. The prophet Nathan said to David, because by doing this you have made the enemies of the Lord show utter contempt. In other words, Samson's life had showed that he didn't care about God. He didn't care about anything that honoring him whatsoever. And his actions had a black eye for God, if you will. Samson, like David, gave the enemies of the Lord an occasion to dishonor the true God. Now, the ultimate end of all sin in the life of a believer or a Christian is the dishonor it brings to Jesus.